The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello people, welcome back to East Hertfordshire once again, and it's Friday. We've made it to the weekend, yay! Now, rounding off this collection of parishes out here in Hertfordshire, I've got one that's full of tales, and one of those tales is that of a gruesome murder that was committed by a 9-year-old boy. Blimey. Welcome to Westmill. Westmill. One left for you in this run out in East Hertfordshire this week, and today we've come down the A10 a short distance to Westmill. With a name that literally references a mill in the west, Westmill straddles the route of Ermine Street, the Roman highway that once linked London to Lincoln and York. Nowadays we know that route better as the A10. The mill, by the way, is a former 16th century water-powered job that's now a private house. The village is a mile south of Buntingford, and the parish is rural, with little habitation outside of Westmill itself. It can be described as a peaceful oasis, with quiet lanes, a small village green, a tea room and a pub, which all make it a popular stopping place for cyclists, walkers and photographers. It's all located within the attractive little valley of the River Rib. The prime meridian passes to the east of Westmill too. It used to have a railway station on the Buntingford branch line, which has long since been lifted. It was demolished in 1968, some 4 years after it closed. The remains of the line can still be seen though. There are many notable residences in Westmill, but maybe the best known isn't even in the village. West of the village, down a lane, is a thatched house called Buttonsnap. It was once owned by the writer Charles Lamb. We'll be having a look at that because it has one of the strangest memorials I think we've ever seen outside on the grass. We'll also discuss Emily Pepys, Nathaniel Salmon and a murderous tale. There's lots to see. Let's go. We begin at the eastern end of Westmill at the site of the old railway station, which served the village between 1863 and 1964 on the Buntingford branch line. It was opened by the Great Eastern Railway. The Buntingford branch line connected not only Westmill, but the town of Buntingford to the railway network at St Margaret's. The area served by the line was predominantly agricultural, and after 1948 its meagre usage did not keep pace with rising costs. When the Hertford East branch was electrified, Buntingford branch trains were reduced in frequency, with through trains to London withdrawn. This led to the line being recommended for closure in the Beeching report, and the passenger service was withdrawn in 1964. Goods services were removed a year later. The line was informally known as the Bunt by its workers. It was only short, and now lifted, the remains of its route through Westmill can still be seen. We'll be talking about this again in further detail when we reach Buntingford itself. Nearby is the River Rib, and like the River Bean, which we met in Walken, it's another tributary of the River Lee. It flows into the Lee just to the east of Hertford after originating near the village of Buckland. Its route runs generally parallel with the A10 through Chipping Widial, Buntingford, Westmill and Broffing, where it's joined by its major tributary, the River Quin. Like the Bean, this river was once used to power watermills, and Westmill had one of its own. It's a 16th century building that's now a private house. It also used to be the main water supply for Buntingford and the surrounding area before a pump was installed. The Rib used to flood frequently in the autumn thanks to heavy rain, but now this issue has been resolved via some dredging and engineering works in the 1970s. This green space not far from the river is the home ground of Westmill Football Club, who play in the Hertfordshire Senior County League. They're proudly sponsored by the Fox and Duck in Buntingford. Earlier this year, they won the Norman Appleby Trophy, the biggest victory in the club's 94-year history. It's kind of an unwritten rule for this channel. If there is a non-league football club in a village, the chances are I'm going to go and find it. And I found the one here in Westmill. I tell you what, there's some proper old school changing rooms here. I love finding things like this. Look at this. Home one side, away the other side. Brilliant. A wooden structure. You wouldn't get that in the Premier League, would you? The next section is a little bereft of anything, so here's a mention of a notable resident, the antiquary Nathaniel Salmon. Born in 1675, he was a curate in the village for several years, but refused to take the oath of allegiance to Queen Anne in 1702. This led him to become a doctor, and he practised in St Ives. He's well known for his History of Hertfordshire, which was published in 1728. The church he would have presided over is next on our walk. St Mary the Virgin has a history that dates back at least 1,000 years. It has pre-conquest origins for sure, because the nave's proportions and pillars are typically Saxon. There's also Saxon decoration in the nave's southeastern corner. The church has had many additions and alterations, including a notable 15th century tower. The whole building was restored in the 19th century, and today it's Grade 2 listed. It features a World War I memorial that was dedicated in 1919, paid for and erected by public subscription. Other features include the pulpit, which was a gift from Thomas Tilston Gregg. There are memorials to the Gregg family on the south wall. For 100 years or so, they were the local squires and were connected with the manufacturing family at Quarry Bank in Stile, Cheshire. The pulpit was given in memory of the last of them. The roof dates from the 15th century and is the highest of any church in the county, except the Abbey of St Albans. The main window of the south aisle wall records 2 deaths at sea: Edward Rose, who drowned in 1865, and William Hoy, who died at sea in 1863. Oh, and don't overlook the door here. Beside it you will find the oldest gravestone in Hertfordshire, hung on the wall in 1876 for safekeeping. It belongs to Sir Nicholas de Luckner, Lord of Westmill, until his death in 1296. Next up, we have the one and only pub in Westmill, the Sword in Hand. As a pub, this dates back to the 16th century, making it one of the oldest in the country. The building is older than that though, dating from the 14th. Today it's a free house with a bar, a dining room and a landscape garden. It serves traditional ales and fine food made with seasonal produce from local suppliers. Its name may have come from the crest of the Gregg family. After all, they lived at Coles Park in the south of the parish, so they would have had quite an influence on the village. The house at Coles Park was demolished in the 1950s after the deaths of Thomas and Mary Gregg, major benefactors to Westmill. They owned several properties in Westmill, and these were given to charities or trusts that today own and administer significant parts of the village, including the village hall, the almshouses, the allotments and the recreation ground. So you may have noticed the Westmill Children's Playground in that last shot. It's currently behind the camera. It's opposite this building here, which is the old school. And this here is the road that goes to the town of Ware, which is a parish we will cover at some point in the future. Before you get to Ware though, between Westmill and that town, there's a place that's literally called Nasty, would you believe? It's called Nasty. It's a tiny little hamlet, and that will be part of an episode as well. I wonder if it's as nasty as it sounds. Definitely though, Westmill is a nice place. We're going to turn around here and head back to the green, and we're going to go and check out a water pump next. Now we're on the green, where there stands a water pump dating from around 1900. It carries the inscription, "Traverse the desert, and then you can tell what treasure exists in the cool deep well." That's an extract from the poem Water by the 19th century London poet Eliza Cook. As far as we know, Cook had no connection with Westmill, but I can tell you of another notable female who did. Emily Pepys, a collateral descendant of the famous diarist, Samuel Pepys. In 1833, Emily Pepys, a child diarist herself, was born in Westmill. Her father was Henry Pepys, who was known as the Bishop of Soda and Man, Bishop of Worcester, and the Rector of Westmill from 1827 to 1840. Henry had several children, but not all of them survived into adulthood. He donated a stained glass window in memory of 4 of them who died while still in childhood. This can be seen behind the altar in the church. Emily was the youngest to survive into adulthood, but still died at a relatively young age in 1877. Her husband was Reverend William Henry Littleton, the rector of Hagley in Worcestershire. Hagley is where Emily's grave can be found today. Under her husband's will, a Lady Emily Littleton Fund was set up in 1844 in her memory for local nursing purposes. Her diary work is seen as very valuable, even though it's only 60 pages long and 2 further pages are missing. The Journal of Emily Pepys covers 6 months of her life between 1844 and 1845, spent in her then family home, Hartlebury Castle, the official residence of the Bishop of Worcester. At the time, Emily was 10. It found its way into the possession of a family called Nutt, but it's not known how. There it was discovered on a shelf in their house by a 14-year-old girl named Dee Cooper, who instigated its publication. What makes the work interesting and informative is simply the fact that it was not written as an assignment given by an adult, but as a private diary containing all the matters that are usually forgotten by the time mature adults come to write memoirs. The longest entry in the journal describes a fire in the small hours of Christmas Day, which has the family huddling in the hall in nightshirts and cloaks. The whole journal can be bought online, and it makes for fascinating reading. A pure, unadulterated glimpse back into a time when life was so different, but still less than 200 years ago. While we're on the subject of events that took place in the 1840s, try this one for size. In 1848, Westmill was the scene of a gruesome murder, that of a small girl named Lucy, by her 9-year-old brother, Billy Game. On August the 24th of that year, William Game, his wife and eldest daughter, left their tied cottage at Coles Park for a day working in the fields. Billy was left in charge of his 3 younger sisters, Lucy, who was 4, Hannah, aged 2, and an unnamed baby. Upon their return, they found Lucy dead, her right arm frightfully shattered and her skull fractured. A report about her death in the Times newspaper was a little more graphic than that, describing blood and brains everywhere. Billy had shot her using an old gun, which William Game confirmed to the press had been loaded when he'd last seen it. The surgeon who later examined Lucy's body confirmed that by saying her wounds were consistent with that of a gunshot or some heavy blunt instrument used with great force. Initially, Billy denied his crime, attempting to blame a fictitious stranger. When nobody could be found matching his description, he confessed all. His reason for killing her was quite mundane. He simply wanted her to stay in the house while he went to see if his mother was coming back. Lucy refused, leading him to turn violent, hitting her on the head with a stick and bashing her arm with a billhook before taking his father's old gun from the bedroom and holding it to her head. Billy signed a confession admitting all he'd done, or at least put his mark to it, and was sent to Hertford jail. It seems almost certain he would have been convicted. Children that age were very seldom executed though. It seems more likely he would have been sentenced to transportation and sent to Australia. Perhaps he was able to begin a new life there. The murder would become the subject of a ballad, and it goes like this. You tender parents all around, come listen unto me, while I unfold and murder cold an awful tragedy. Near Buntingford in Hertfordshire, in a village called Westmill, the sad inhuman murder will cause your blood to chill. This murdered child, so innocent and just 4 years of age, has closed her little eyes in death, all by a brother's rage. A lad of only 9 years old, how dreadful to relate, each parent's heart must bleed with woe to think upon her fate. The killer's name is William Game. He struck the girl with dread, then with his father's billhook he wounded her dear head. Then cut and maimed her hands and face in such a dreadful way, enough to make your blood run cold when thinking of that day. How little did their parents think, when they were far from home, that such a shocking fate as this would to their daughter come. That they should see her mangled corpse lay bleeding on the floor, the darling child they loved so well, alas, was now no more. Her tender mother, when she found her darling child was dead, was driven into wild despair, her senses now are fled. You tender parents, when you hear this shocking tale of woe, the feeling for your children dear will cause your tears to flow. This youthful killer now does find how hard 'tis to bewall the horrid crime of murder within a dismal jail. May God some comfort now impart to parents of this Cain, who for their murdered daughter mourn, how dreadful is their pain. Back to the green, and here we have the Westmill tea rooms. These are connected to the history of the watermill in the village. The watermill was the only mill in Hertfordshire with 2 mill wheels. After the Civil War, it was sold to Thomas Feltham of Ware Priory, and in 1946 it was listed as an ancient monument. The tea rooms were started by Mr. Goebel, a miller and baker, who wished to provide the facilities for cycle clubs. That same tea room still operates today on the village green, and it still attracts cyclists. It's not a bad place to end this walk, actually. Okay, we're pretty much finished with walking around Westmill. There's just one more job to do, and that is put a card on the notice board, which you can see in front of you there, and that is Westmill complete. We are not done with this parish yet, though. No way are we done, because now we're going to hop in the car and drive down this road you can see behind me. This will take us to a little hamlet called Cherry Green, and then onto a house called Buttonsnap, which is quite interesting if you like your literature. Westmill Parish contains a former civil parish called Walkley, which is essentially a deserted medieval village. The remains of the village lie on a private road. On the public road towards that, though, is a house called Buttonsnap, located in an area called Cherry Green. Buttonsnap is a 17th century cottage that's associated with the writer Charles Lamb. With its thatched roof, it's been listed Grade 2 on the National Heritage List for England since February 1967, and it's well worth a visit. Buttonsnap has changed little since it was built. It is therefore a good example of a traditional cottage with a roof of thatched straw. It was originally owned by Francis Field, the uncle of the writer Charles Lamb. In 1812, Field's widow conveyed the property to Lamb himself, and he lived in the cottage until 1815. Apparently, it was he who gave the cottage its Buttonsnap name. The cottage has 2 ceramic plaques on either side of the front door that tell of its connection to Lamb. In addition, the man has one of the most unusual memorials outside the house, a small bust on the grass verge in front of the cottage. In 1947, Buttonsnap's owner presented the cottage to the Royal Art Society. 2 years later, the society sold the property to the Charles Lamb Society, which leased it to tenants. Because of rising costs of maintaining the structure, it was sold in 1985. So, who was Charles Lamb? Born in 1775, he was an essayist, poet and antiquarian, best known for his essays of a liar and for the children's book Tales from Shakespeare, co-authored with his sister Mary. He had a raft of literary friends such as Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Robert Southey, William Wordsworth, Dorothy Wordsworth and William Hazlitt. It's fair to say Lamb was at the centre of a major literary circle in England. He has been described in the past as the most lovable figure in English literature. Little is known about Charles's life before he was 7, other than that Mary taught him to read at a very early age. It's believed he had smallpox during his early years, which forced him into a long period of convalescence. In 1782, he was enrolled at Christ's Hospital, a typical English boarding school, where many students wrote of the terrible violence they suffered there. Lamb had a stutter, and this deprived him of a Grecian status at Christ Hospital, thus disqualifying him for a clerical career. Whilst Coleridge and other scholarly boys were able to go on to Cambridge, Lamb left school at 14 and was forced to find a more prosaic career. By 1792, he was working in the accountant's office for the British East India Company, and he remained there for 25 years. Both Charles and his sister had a period of mental illness. He spent 6 weeks in a mental facility during 1795. Mary Lamb's illness was more severe than her brother's, and it led to her murdering her own mother with a knife. Charles would later find a local place for Mary in a private mental facility called Fisher House with the help of a doctor. Lamb's first publication was the inclusion of 4 sonnets in Coleridge's poems on various subjects, published in 1796 by Joseph Cottle. The sonnets were significantly influenced by the poems of Burns and the sonnets of William Bowles, a largely forgotten poet of the late 18th century. In the final years of the 18th century, Lamb began to work on prose, first in a novella entitled Rosamund Grey, which tells the story of a young girl whose character is thought to be based on Anne Simmons, one of his early love interests. Lamb's poems garnered little attention and are seldom read today. As he himself came to realise, he was a much more talented prose stylist than poet. William Wordsworth went so far as to comment that Lamb wrote prose exquisitely some 5 years before his most famous work was published. That was the Essays of Elia, which were published in 1823. Elia was the pen name Lamb used as a contributor to the London magazine. They were criticised by Robert Southey, who thought its author to be irreligious. Lamb's earlier essay on the tragedies of Shakespeare, considered with reference to their fitness for stage representation, has often been taken as the ultimate romantic dismissal of the theatre. In it, he argues that Shakespeare should be read rather than performed in order to protect the famous bard from butchering by mass commercial performances. Whilst the essay certainly criticises contemporary stage practice, it also develops a more complex reflection on the possibility of representing Shakespearean dramas. The essay was published in 1811. A further collection called The Last Essays of Elia was published in 1833, shortly before Lamb's death in 1834. He died of a streptococcal infection, erysipelas, contracted from a minor graze on his face, sustained after slipping in the street. From 1833 until their deaths, Charles and Mary both lived at Bay Cottage, Church Street, Edmonton, North London, which today is part of the London Borough of Enfield. Lamb is buried in All Saints Churchyard in Edmonton, and his sister is buried beside him. There has always been a small but enduring following for Lamb's works. Because of his quirky, even bizarre style, he's been more of a cult favourite than an author with mass popular or scholarly appeal. 2 of the houses at Christ Hospital, Lamb A and Lamb B, are named in his honour, and he's also honoured by the Latimer Grammar School in Edmonton, whose Lamb House is named after him. A major academic prize awarded each year at Christ Hospital School Speech Day is the Lamb Prize for Independent Study. I sometimes wish I could write like Charles Lamb. I'm not talented at all when it comes to writing prose. It took a lot of effort to write this script. I'll stick to visuals mainly. That's it for this Hertfordshire run. I'll be back soon. Tomorrow, we're off into Derbyshire once again. See you there. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.